Hey everybody, Watchmen in the Woods, Scripture with Tyler T. I'm going to do a little bit different today. I'm going to skip chapter 5, which is family problems, and go into temptation, which is chapter 6. We'll go back to family problems, but right now I just feel like this is needed to be read. So, chapter 6. Temptation, winning the battle over God's best. The essence of temptation is the invitation to live independently of God. Neil T. Anderson. God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterwards, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love Him. James 1:12. Temptation is quite the chameleon. Taken on many different forms, it sneaks into your consciousness and aligns itself with your unhealthiest impulses and desires. For some of us, temptation comes disguised as foods we know we shouldn't eat. For others, it shows up as a pull to cross the invisible line into drunkenness. Some temptation hides out in our accountant's office at tax time, or wraps itself in an opportunity to skim a little off the top of the company's budget, or the company budget. Some temptation calls out as the need for one more high, then one more high, and then one more. One of temptation's most effective guises is sexual enticement. We all know how that goes. This temptation shows up many ways, most commonly as a desire to have premarital sex, to view pornography, or to step outside of marriage into an adulterous affair. Temptation is not selective, and it's not something only a few of us face. We are confronted with its advancements and titillations, I'm not sure what that word means, every single day. So in order to be on guard against it, you and I have to be brutally honest about temptation's lure and how it manifests in our lives. What dangerous pull do you struggle with most often? Which of the temptations mentioned above resonate with you? If you think you stand above being tempted, you may be dealing with another temptation altogether: pride. The way the world is now, think about it. No one is immune. In his letter to the early church in Corinth, Paul warns, if you think you are standing strong, be careful not to fall. The temptations in your life are no different than from what others experience. 1 Corinthians 10:11-12. Regardless of what is calling out to you and tempting you to stray, you can be sure you are not the only one. As intense as your struggle may be, it's not unique. In studying human nature and the scriptures, I'm increasingly convinced that the devil only has about half a dozen tricks. He constantly throws those tricks in front of us because we seem to fall for them over and over. But we don't have to. We will never completely quell the raging storms of temptation, but we can discover how to stand strong in their midst. Remember, first and foremost, that being tempted is not a sin. It is just a part of being human. The sin comes the moment you give into the temptation and act on the impulse that's pulling you. But when you know how to resist the bait, you can avoid sin and all of its consequences. The goal then is not to stop being tempted, but to discover how to stand against the temptation, or to pull it another way, to discover how to constantly choose God's best over the counterfeit pleasure that is the center of temptation's ploy. Standing strong against temptation. Pick up any newspaper or turn on CNN and you will be bombarded with stories about people who went toe-to-toe with temptation and lost. There have been scores of headlines over the last few years about the indiscretions of great leaders in particular. Every single one of those indiscretions began with poorly handled temptation. As sensationalized as some of these stories become, they are actually all too common. They could be anyone's story. Even King David, who the scriptures uphold as one of the most revered, God-honoring men of his generation, committed a tragic sin because he handled a certain temptation badly. In the spring of the year, when the kings normally go out to war, David sent Jacob and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Get him. One afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of bed and was walking on the roof of the palace. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. He sent someone to find out who she was, and he was told she was Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to the palace, he slept with her. 2 Samuel 11:1-4. David's downfall was the result of several poor decisions. First of all, David decided to stay home when it was customary for him to be at war. Oh my goodness. He wasn't where he should have been. Ooh. If David had been in the battlefield with his men, he could have sidestepped the Bathsheba episode altogether. But as the old saying goes, idle hands are the devil's tools. Second, when David noticed Bathsheba bathing, he had a clear choice to make. He could have turned away and refocused his attention, or he could entertain Bathsheba's lure. Choosing the latter, he sent someone to find out who she was and took a step closer to his downfall. Finally, David decided to have Bathsheba brought to him. In doing so, he took definite action on his temptation and jumped into the line of sin. The chain of events David ignited when he sent for Bathsheba resulted in tragedy and heartache for everyone involved, as all sin does. David's affair is one of the most studied accounts in the Bible because it is a clear example of the subtle interplay between temptation and sin. Not to mention, even though David's temptation was sexual, his experience can be applied to any temptation we face. The indiscretion with Bathsheba highlights 4 critical steps you and I need to take in order to find victory over every temptation that threatens to bring us down. When you are tempted, admit it. Before David's affair with Bathsheba, he had led an exemplary life. As a teenager, he killed Goliath. Through his military career, he earned a glowing reputation and was highly respected. He rose to kingship in Israel. He was called by God to start rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. A wealthy man, he donated his own gold and silver to the building project. He recognized the structure of the priests in the temple in a way that would remain protocol for hundreds of years. How could this model of a man end up with such a black mark on his life? One of the contributing factors was likely that he was hesitant to admit such a thing could happen to him. The first step to standing strong against temptation is to admit when you are tempted. Be honest with God and with yourself about what you are struggling against. There are two primary mindsets that keep people from admitting temptation. One is pride and the other is shame. On the one hand, people who think highly of themselves and the position they've earned in the world sometimes think they are above temptation's common lure. They think they are exempt, that they are too smart to step into the traps that bring others down, such as a pride-infused refusal to admit temptation leads to a fall more often than not. Years after the Bathsheba incident, David's son Solomon wrote, "Pride goes before destruction, and haughtiness before a fall." Proverbs 16:18. It is humid outside. Sorry, y'all. Whether Solomon's wisdom had anything to do with this father's indiscretion, we'll never know. But the proverb is true. When we are too high on ourselves to admit the possibility of sin or wrongdoing, we lower our defenses and our chances for a catastrophic skyrocket. The second reason most people are hesitant to own up to temptation is a sense of shame. They are embarrassed to admit the temptations that they face to themselves, much less to God. Perhaps they feel guilty about the nature of the temptation, or maybe they just don't want to take on the perceived weakness that comes with being tempted. But there is no shame in temptation. It doesn't strike because you are weak or because there is something wrong with you. It strikes because you are human. Temptation is an equal opportunity offender. It goes after everyone and works especially hard on those who won't admit it's there. Denying temptation makes you more susceptible to it. But when you admit that you are tempted, you open the door for God's power to work in your situation. He can only help you overcome your temptation to the degree you express in your dependency on Him. Rest assured, when you admit your temptation to God, you aren't telling Him anything He doesn't already know. He won't be surprised. Be quick to lay everything bare before the one who knows you best and ask Him for His power to help you stand strong. As theologian John Owen wrote, If we do not abide in prayer, we will abide in temptation. Let this be one aspect of our daily intercession. God, preserve my soul and keep my heart and and all its ways, so that I will not be entangled. When this is true in our lives, a passing temptation will not overcome us. We will remain free while others lie in bondage. David learned this lesson the hard way later in life, well after the fallout of the Bathsheba incident. He penned the following psalm to the same effect. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Psalm 139, 23 through 24. As you and I navigate the temptations of life, we would do well to keep these wise prayers on our lips, along with our quick admission when we are tempted. Recognize temptation as a spiritual battle. We are engaged in spiritual battle every day of our lives. When we acknowledge that reality, we are more prepared to handle the flaming arrows directed our way. Stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. 1 Peter 5:8. We have an enemy who is hell-bent, literally, on destroying us. The devil schemes against us, tempting us where he thinks he can break us. He is constantly trying to get us to step away from the life God has in store and run after the carrot he is dangling in front of our noses. Every temptation we face is an attack in the ongoing battle as he is waging. As Paul writes, "For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and even against evil spirits in the heavenly places." Ephesians 6:12. Since we know we are engaged in such a fierce battle, the devil's attacks should never come as a surprise. In a war, sneak attacks are one of the most effective methods of destruction. But since the Bible has already let us in on our enemy's tactics, we have the advantage of being able to sidestep surprise, as Principle 2 of Unshakable Faith tells us to do. Even though temptation is a spiritual issue, at its core, most temptation manifests itself physically. Obviously, there's a strong physical component in sexual temptation. We were wired to be sexual beings. There is a physical element to gluttony. We were created with a need for food with taste buds that signal enjoyment. There's a physical factor in every unhealthy addiction. Once our body gets used to a particular surge of pleasure, we can become consumed by the drive to recreate that sensation again and again. But as we take on this powerful physical aspect of the temptations we face, we have to remember that it is part and parcel of the spiritual battle we are engaged in. The two cannot be separated. One of the enemy's strategies for making us more susceptible to temptation has been its attempt to break this link between physical and spiritual realities. Over the last several hundred years, during the Enlightenment, French philosopher René Descartes outlined the first systematic argument for what has become known as the principle of mind-body dualism. In essence, he presented the theory that what you do with, or that, oh my gosh, sorry. He presented the theory that what you do with or to your body does not affect your mind, your emotions, or your spirit. The ramifications of this theory have left us with a skewed understanding of the mind-body connection, which has resulted in an incorrect view of sin. In response, countless philosophers, leaders of major religions, and New Testament scholars have thoroughly debunked the dualistic argument. There is, they contend, a deep connection between your mind, your body, and your spirit, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer writes in his book, Creation and Fall, Temptation. Man does not have a body, he does not have a soul. Rather, he is body and soul. Man in the beginning is really his body. He is one. He is his body, as Christ is completely his body, as the church is the body of Christ. All you have to do is look at your life experience to know that your body, your soul, and your mind are inseparable. I would venture a guess that some things you have done with your body in the past are still affecting your mind and your spirit. And you know from experience that what goes in your mind and spirit can affect you physically. God didn't create us as compartmentalized beings. He created us as threefold persons: mind, body, and spirit. Each of these three areas is intertwined with the others, and the spiritual battle is being leveled on all three fronts. The devil wants to hurt you and me. He wants to hurt our loved ones. He wants to rob us of God's best, and the temptation is his go-to trick. Temptation is his go-to trick. But God wants more for us. He loves us and wants us to experience the fullness of life. So when we find ourselves being tempted away from what we know is right, we must look to God and acknowledge that we are in the midst of a spiritual battle. When we can recognize our temptations as the tactic it is, we will be better able to overcome it. Steer clear of people and places that tempt you. Sin doesn't just slip in and wreak havoc out of the blue. There's a process. Adultery, one-night stands, going too far, drinking too much, becoming addicted. These things are the result of thought patterns and small decisions over a period of time. Often they are the consequence of allowing ourselves to be around the wrong people or in the wrong places. David's disgrace with Bathsheba began the day he let himself lay out of work and look at a woman who wasn't his wife. Our biggest regrets usually begin similarly. God will give us the strength to stand against temptation, but he also hands us part of the responsibility. We have to protect ourselves by staying away from the people and places that foster temptation. We all know where those places are for us. We know who the people are. Instead of playing with fire and praying we won't get burned, we have to be mature enough to steer clear of flammable situations. Taking responsibility means thinking several steps ahead. One of the wisest things you and I can do is build guardrails into our lives that make it difficult for us to be tempted. And if we are tempted, make it difficult for us to cross over into sin. Use common sense. If going up on the roof and looking at a woman bathing tempts you, stay off the roof. If you are going out with colleagues after work, if going out with colleagues after work causes you to drink too much, don't go. If being online while you're home alone leads you to viewing pornography, turn off the computer and do something else. If you're single and your friends have a habit of one-night stands, be more careful about the time you spend with them. The Bible warns to watch out for those whose minds are set on fleeting pleasure. They say, "Let's feast and drink, for tomorrow we die." Don't be fooled by those who say such things, for bad company corrupts good character. Think carefully about what is right and stop sinning. 1 Corinthians 15:32-33. We get ourselves into trouble by justifying small, unwise decisions, sometimes out of desire and sometimes just out of convenience. For example, there may be nothing wrong with going to lunch with a coworker of the opposite sex alone, but if either of you is married, it is not the wisest decision. Maybe you really do need to discuss something important, but find another setting. There's nothing wrong with this lunches can quickly lead to a sense of intimacy between the two of you, spiraling into an emotional affair that paves the way for a physical one. Trust me, I've seen the scenario play out countless times in different variations. The wise thing to do is to put a guardrail in place. In this case, decide you won't eat alone with anyone of the opposite sex other than your spouse under any circumstance. That way you can head off the enemy's attack before it starts. If you and I aren't careful, seemingly consequential decisions have the potential to put us on a slippery slope toward powerful temptation. Better to be overly alert and stay far from sin than to walk too close to the edge and get pushed over. This is not a game. We must do what we can to thwart the devil's schemes by making thoughtful, prayerful decisions about the places we go and the people we engage with every day. If we ignore the importance of those choices, we could be setting ourselves up for a major fall. Focus on God, not the temptation. A wise man once said, "What we see depends mainly on what we look for. The more you focus on the temptation in your life, the stronger that temptation will become. The more you focus on God, the stronger His power will become. Imagine how differently David's story would have turned out if he had gone back downstairs after he saw Bathsheba and turned his attention to praying and studying God's word. But David chose to focus his attention on the temptation rather than on God, and ended up stepping into a big pile of sin. No matter how strong your temptation, God is stronger. Not only that, He promises to give you a way out. Earlier in this chapter, we looked at Paul's declaration that the temptations you face aren't unique. Take a look now at how he finishes that thought. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you can endure. 1 Corinthians 10:13. No matter how powerful the addiction, no matter how great the attraction to the other person, no matter how strong your craving for just a little more, God will show you a way around the snare looming in front of you. Focus your attention on Him. Then, when the way out presents itself, be quick to take it. Refuse to play the victim and claim that you didn't have a choice in your situation. You know that's not true. Paul is clear that God will not allow any temptation to be more than you can stand. He will show you a different path. You are not in this alone. Perhaps you feel like you have already messed up, and no matter how much you focus on God, you can't undo the damages you've done. Let the end of David's story give you hope. Of course, David's sin with Bathsheba had consequences. The repercussions of sin can't be diminished. Galatians 6:7-9. But David learned from his mistake and made a decision to honor and follow God going forward. When he reached the end of his life, David was living for God once again and doing great things for the kingdom. In fact, if you fast forward hundreds of years into the New Testament book of Acts, David is described as a man after God's own heart. David, a man about whom God said, "I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do." Acts 13:22. Even if you have lost the battle with temptation in the past, and even if you are still dealing with the negative consequences of giving in, you can choose to start concentrating your attention on God and living the life He has in store for you from this point forward. Your past does not diminish you in God's eyes if you will look to Him for forgiveness and choose to focus your life around His truth now. Choosing God's best. Ultimately, All temptation is the temptation to trade God's best for something less. The devil tries to convince us that by giving into temptation, we'll find what we are looking for. His scheme worked on Adam and Eve in the garden, and it still works on millions every day. When you and I say yes to what's tempting to us and cross the line into sin, we trade God's incomparable plan for something that tastes good or feels good in the moment. It's not a fair trade. We may experience some fleeting pleasure, but afterwards we are left feeling empty and craving more. There's an ancient Cherokee legend about a young man who went to see the chief of his village. The young man said, "Chief, there is a battle going on inside me. In my mind, I see two wolves fighting. One wolf is evil. He's full of pride, lust, jealousy, and greed. The other wolf is good. He's full of peace, love, humility, and faith. They clash every day. Can you tell me which one will win?" The chief looked at the young man in the eye and said, "The one you feed." So it is with our ongoing battle between the devil's schemes to tempt us and God's best plan for us, or for our lives. If you ever get to the point where you feel overwhelmed by your temptation, you're feeding to the wrong wolf, if you ever get to the point where you feel overwhelmed by your temptation, you're feeding the wrong wolf. Sorry, I had to reread that. But as you cooperate with God, by admitting when you are tempted, recognizing the spiritual battle you are in, steering clear of the people and places that tempt you, and keeping your attention focused on Him, you will be doing your part to feed the right wolf. Then you will be able to stand strong in the midst of temptation storms, filled with peace, love, humility, and faith. That was a long video. Thanks for sticking around if you're watching this still, and like, subscribe, and comment, and you have a great day. I'm gonna go cool off. See y'all. God bless you.